Good afternoon. I have to start by apologizing. It's very unlikely that I'm going to tell you how to solve global poverty just in 25 minutes. In fact, I've probably made a career explaining that it's not going to be possible to solve global poverty with one magic bullet, and we have to stop looking for them. But I'm going to be talking about how we need to start rethinking social production for the digital age, how in fact we know very little and how we can learn more. The digital age, digitization, artificial intelligence, are the themes of this summit, has both created new needs and new opportunities. I'm going to start by talking about the new needs that are going to emerge, and then talking about the new opportunities that it caused. The new needs is of course, the questions of whether digitization, artificial intelligence will replace all the jobs. This is a picture of a robot that makes hamburgers. I actually think, so this is a restaurant that is ruled by robots. There was a whole kind of hoopla about that restaurant. I actually think it closed in the meantime. But it's an important picture because precisely these are restaurant jobs that are being replaced in this setting. And why is it new? It's because the first IT revolution led to a job polarization. It hollowed out jobs at the middle of the distribution, leaving out jobs like restaurant jobs that could not be easily automatized, and job at the other end of the distribution, creative jobs that could not easily automatize either. So what happened with the introduction of personal computers, spreadsheets, and word processing and so on, is that you got fewer jobs in the middle of the distribution, so production, office admin, etc., and more jobs towards the right side of the distribution, so managers, professional technicians, and the left side of the proposition, that is the people who work in restaurants, the people who clean houses, the people who walk your dogs, and so on, that are very difficult to replace by either robots or computers. So this is what happened in the first the first IT revolution. And the consequence of that has been an explosion of inequality, because it really directly hit the middle class in the rich countries that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. The question, of course, everybody is asking now is whether this time, this new IT revolution fueled by artificial intelligence is going to be different, in the sense that whether it's going to be possible for computers, robots, smartphones, and so on to replace different type of jobs that were not replaceable before. So the OECD put out a study where they look for every kind of jobs, the task content of the job, and then look at the potential for each of these tasks to be automatized. And when you do that, you can link it back to the type of job that are at risk of being automatized. And now you're seeing effects that are very different from the one we would have in the IT revolution, where some jobs that seem to be pretty difficult to replace before, such as food preparation, construction, and cleaning, will have now high potential to be replaced. So you have like the robots that can clean themselves. You have, eventually you're going to have self-driving machine. You have that robot that prepares hamburger and so on. Some jobs that remain pretty difficult to replace, such as hospitality or teaching, fortunately for me. And then jobs that felt to be extremely protected before, like lawyers, and start seeing ChatGPT potentially competing with them in the future. So the impact, according to the OECD anyways, of the potential of this wave of computerization could be quite different. Overall, they find that 46% of the workers in the OECD countries are at risk of being replaced or fundamentally transformed by AI. Now, what this is ignoring, what the OECD calculation is ignoring, is that artificial intelligence could either be a substitute or a complement to a human skill. So it's only looking at the substitution aspect without looking at the complementary aspect. And so to give you an idea, for example, you could, in the Industrial Revolution, the first one, you could have mills that replace people who were previously weaving by hand. So that's substitute for their activities. But you could also have a steam engine that help transport goods from one part of the country to the other much faster, and that's potentially a complement to anyone who is actually producing goods or need inputs for the goods. So likewise, artificial intelligence could become a substitute for what people do. For example, now you don't go to a travel agent, you fight with your computers to try to get yourself a ticket. It hasn't improved the customer experience necessarily, but it has replaced a human by a computer. Or you could have a complement. For example, there could be an the reading of X-ray by artificial intelligence could be then controlled by a physician, such that the artificial intelligence is a complement to what the physician is doing. So what we have not fully understood is whether or not artificial intelligence is going to be complement or substitute in the future, because that's just the beginning of it. And therefore, the net effect is very unclear. And in fact, when you ask professional economists, so these are my colleagues teaching at top institutions, every month or so, the Chicago booth asks them questions about the economy. Usually people are very opinionated. They have very strong views, often similar views. Here you have, interestingly, nobody seems to strongly agree or strongly disagree with the view that the rising use of robots and artificial intelligence will likely increase substantially the number of workers in advanced countries who are unemployed for long periods. That's the question I was asked. The first point is nobody seems to really know for sure. No one strongly agree or strongly disagree. And secondly, people kind of divide more or less equally across the three categories. So this is something where, surprisingly, most of my colleagues don't have a view. I should say I don't answer this panel because I never have a very strong view on anything. So economists are very uncertain, and for very good reason. It's because it's going to depend on how AI is going to put to use in the future. I should highlight that it's not going to depend on AI, it's going to depend on humans. And in particular, it's going to depend on regulations and on the incentives of companies to the proper use of AI. Today, unfortunately, in most of the OECD countries, and most poor countries as well, the incentives are very much to replace humans by either machine or computers whenever possible, because machines don't go on strikes, machines don't require holidays, they don't become sick, and the tax treatment of machine is very favorable compared to the tax treatment of human. Therefore, it is always cheaper because when you invest in infrastructure, that can be software infrastructure or hardware infrastructure, you can depreciate the cost in your taxes. When you hire a human, you don't do that. And in addition, you have to pay all the taxes payroll taxes related to welfare, pension, and so on. So today, if you have the choice between investing in a machine or investing in a human to do a particular job, it is always beneficial to invest in the machine, even if the machine is more expensive and less productive. So the incentives today are all in the direction of what my colleague Daron Asimoglu calls so-so automation, which is automation that doesn't lead to an increase in productivity of labor, of capital, or total productivity of factor, but is not too unproductive that it doesn't compensate for the favorable tax treatment. So something has to change there, which is in our hand in the sense that it's choices in terms of regulation and so on. So that the future uses of AI are deployed in order to make humans more productive, not in order to replace humans. But we don't yet know what's going to unfold in years to come, because it's really the very beginning of the surge in AI. So we don't yet know what's going to happen to once the surge of AI continue. This is the very beginning. It's hard to tell whether this has replaced workers so far or will replace workers in the future. We don't know either, and that's where I'm going to move forward, what's going to happen for the poorer countries in the world. Countries in the MENA regions, countries in Africa, a country in Asia, if a lot of labor will be replaced by AI. For example, many countries have developed very rapidly with service centers. What's going to happen to this service center if chatbots can replace humans to take care of your needs, customer service needs, and so on? We don't yet know. So until now, the developing countries are pretty much been left relatively unscathed by the first IT revolution, because a lot of the work, in fact, that moved to developing countries was not replaced by computers. But in the future, it could happen. So this replacement that we've seen in rich countries could happen in developing countries. The one thing we do know, looking back at the past, is the impact of industrial robots. So in some sense, that's kind of the second generation of IT revolution, our industrial robots. What we do know is that in places that have been, in regions in the US, where the industry was such that many industrial robots could replace people. So for example, Detroit, that is the home of car manufacturing, where there is a lot of robots can do a lot of the jobs there. In those regions, you had a lot of loss of employment and a lot of loss of wages for the workers that were basically replaced by the robots. So the experience of Revolution 1, IT Revolution 1 and IT Revolution 1.5 is that when people get replaced by digitalization one way or the other, they don't find very easily or very rapidly other jobs to compensate that. We do know from the first industrial revolution that eventually it gets better, but we know that in the UK, for example, in the 19th century, it took almost a century for the wages of workers that were replaced by steam engine machines and so on to go back to their pre-industrial revolution levels. And in the meantime, there was a lot of suffering that happened to this class of people. So all of that gives us, should be a note of warning that the next several decades might be extraordinarily complicated. They will be more complicated if we don't make an effort to move forward and to use the AI technology in a sensible way to increase the productivity of humans instead of replacing them. But history has no reason to make us particularly optimistic in this regard. So what is going to do to global inequality? Of course, we don't yet know, but we know where we are starting from, which is what happened between 1980 and 2016 in the world. So what happened to the change in inequality over this period can be described by this curve called the elephant curve. This one is from the World Inequality Database, the first. And you can see that what happened in this period is that there is the back of the elephant, or maybe it's the head of the elephant, which is the poorest 50% of the world population did pretty well. They captured about 12% of total growth in the period. This is what allowed us to get closer to the 2030 objective of reducing the number of people in extreme poverty, although we didn't quite get there. This, of course, is the growth of India and China, but not just that. So in poor countries, people became less poor. Of course, in the extreme poor countries, a bit less so. So this is the back of the elephant. Then at the very top, we have the trunk of the elephant, which are the very richest people in the world. So the top 1% of the world captured 27% of global growth. So about twice as much as or even more than twice as much as the poorest half of the population. And then in the middle, we have the bottom 50% of the world, okay, 49% of the world, the middle one, which basically is 90% of the population in the US and Western Europe. So these are the people who lost their job due to the first IT revolution and didn't find easily good jobs elsewhere. These are the these are the people who lost their jobs due to the competition with China, for example. These are the people whose wages have been stagnating for now 50 years. So the bottom 90% of the US population, and which corresponds to about 49% of the world, captured very little of the income growth. As years have passed, the risk is for the head of the elephant to flatten out, and for all of the growth to be captured by the very wealthy. As China and India moves to the right of this distribution, and as the jobs, the type of jobs that were offshore to developing countries disappear with the new wave of automation. We are in a very unequal world as it is, with the poorest half lagging behind everywhere. Of course, the MENA region and the sub-Saharan region are the most unequal in the world. In the MENA regions, the bottom 50% only has 9% of the income, while the top 10% has almost 60% of the income, and it's similar in sub-Saharan Africa. So we are starting from this very unequal situation with a risk that artificial intelligence contributes to making the world more unequal. On top of that, of course, we have all of the other things that are threatening the life of the poorest more than the life of anybody else. Of course, there is natural disasters, like the terrible earthquake that happened in Turkey, which affect many people, rich and poor in Turkey, but of course, if it affects people who are already poor, even worse, because they have nowhere to go even if they survived it. And the organization of the help for them is much harder when people live in remote places or in places in Syria part where there is no access of aid. There is climate change. The effect of climate change is going to be disproportionately felt in the countries that are poor, both because they're already hot and because income is protective. For example, when it's very hot in Dubai, you can have air conditioning. When it's very hot in Pakistan, you don't have this solution. So for all of these reasons, we do need to do something, rethink social protection. Unfortunately, digitization doesn't give only new challenges, it also gives us new tools. What are those new tools? Well, the first one is the huge spread of mobile phones and of digital money. If you look, for example, at Africa, just since 1914, there has been a very large progression of digital money. So a lot of people have now access to the digital wallets in many parts of the continent. That has fueled in the whole world, but particularly in developing economy, a large increase in access of people to a bank account of some kind. So that's a tool that's available to governments or to anybody to reach people more easily. The second thing that has happened is in particular due to research I'll talk about in a minute, much more willingness, both in the international community and in governments in the poorer countries, to transfer directly cash to their citizens when they need it. So it used to be that cash transfer were a no-no for poor countries. And now you can see just in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, from 2010 to 2014, we went from 21 countries with some form of cash transfer to 40 countries with some kind of cash transfer. So huge, much more willingness to do that. When you combine the two, you have a tool that is potentially very powerful, which is the ability to reach people who need money when they need it very fast. What needs to be done then is a combination of the use of the digital money as a platform the willingness to send cash, and the ability to target cheaply and efficiently the people who need help the most. One example I'll develop is the example of the Novici program in Togo that was put together during the pandemic. This example is a perfect example of harnessing the technologies both for effective delivery and effective targeting. So when the pandemic hit, Togo decided that they needed to be able to help the citizen in places where they needed to lock down the economy for fighting the pandemic. First thing they did is to convince all of the mobile money operators to work on one platform, regardless of who was your operator, to give digital transfer to anybody with access to a phone, not necessarily a smartphone, it could be used with a regular phone, to send the transfer via mobile money. So as soon as you had access to a phone, not necessarily yours, you could register to the program. Second thing is, they worked on targeting. So they had a very imperfect system for targeting people. Their registry was incomplete. So they decided to start from scratch for this program in 2 steps. First steps, use satellite data to identify the poorest places. So using satellite data on, using a bunch of GIS data and training a model on past consumption data, they were able to identify the poorest canton in the countries. Second step, inside this poorest country, use cell phone metadata, and again, a machine learning model, to predict who is likely to be rich, so that the rich could be excluded and everyone else was included. So that's a second step, prioritizing the poorest mobile subscriber. When you combine the two, you can have an algorithm that identifies people who are poor. And the algorithm outperforms the feasible alternative, as well as, in fact, an alternative like calculating your asset index, which was infeasible in the case of COVID, but is in some sense the standard as usual of a lot of targeting for digital protection. So that gives you an example of, literally this platform was put together in 2 weeks during the pandemic, and then the targeting effort took place in the process of the pandemic, of harnessing these new technologies to reach people quickly and efficiently. And this could be generalized in other settings that gives you, in some sense, the pipeline to be ready with aid the moment you need it. So this shows the potential of AI to serve people for the better. Thanks to digital, in particular, and the progress in data science, we also have new knowledge. JPAL, which is the Jamil Poverty Action Lab that I co-founded and direct, has done research on social protection around the world. And we've learned 3 things that I want to share today quickly. The first one is that social protection, in particular cash payment in social protection, does not make people lazy. So people do not stop working if you give them money. In fact, most people want to work. All over the world, that is true. Therefore, you should not be worried about cash transfer. The second is cash transfer are put to good use. People do not use them to buy alcohol or to waste them. They use them to build their house, to send their kids to school, for food, and so on. Again, another reason not to be worried about cash transfers. And the third one is that complex targeting systems, many application steps, complicated rules, exclude the poorest because they don't know how to manage the system, and they don't know how to figure it out. They are the least likely to be able to pay bribes. They are the least likely to be able to go 5 times to the office where they need to register, and so on. So that summarizes that if you want an efficient protection system to help the poor deal with all the risks that they are going to have to deal with moving forward, you need systems that are very transparent, that are very simple, and the best way to do that is to have cash transfer or mobile money transfers, and to use as much as possible automatic way of transferring. So the needs are great, and we have a lot to learn. JPAL works with governments in the MENA region and elsewhere to help learn more. We were involved in the evaluation of the novice transfers through our affiliates to help prepare a social protection system for the challenges ahead. For example, in Egypt, JPAL MENA works in a partnership with the Ministry of Social Protection in the Egypt Impact Lab to deal with all of the new challenges that Egypt faces now, with the currency having been devaluated by half, with the food prices have gone up a lot, the reliance on Ukraine and Russian wheat, and so on. All of these challenges that Egypt faces now, they need new knowledge to be able to very quickly and efficiently reach their citizens. They are ready to innovate, they are ready to try new things, to get women to work, to help the poorest of the poor, to protect those who have lost their jobs. And all of that we are doing together by helping them think through innovative programs, and even more importantly, evaluate them as rigorously as possible. Because as I said, I don't have the solution to eradicate poverty. All we have is very partial, very targeted ideas, but if we deploy them efficiently, we can definitely help the lives of many of the poorest and progress towards the SDG goals. Thank you so much.